In this episode, we will be doing stage orange. Orange is an individual focusing stage. Orange is created as a response to the excesses of stage blue, whereas blue, such as with the Catholic Church, was overly strict with laws preventing people from doing much of anything, preventing people from expressing their thoughts without burning them at the stake. um, you know, hating things like science because they went against the doctrine of the church. Stage orange arises as a reaction to that. Um, it uh, it came about mostly with the Enlightenment. Those were the very first stages. Very first emergences of orange in Europe. The Enlightenment was a, a surge of culture, a surge of looking at the world in new ways, invention, uh, science. Copernicus, Galileo, Newton, they were all products of the Enlightenment, got people to question the church, question laws, just question the way that things were set up. And it's always a response to blue, and just once a society's been established and been around for a long time, a blue society, eventually the people in it start to experiment with other ways of looking at the world and other ways of doing things, and that is when stage orange happens. So what are the aspects of orange? The first one is libertarianism. So orange, again, as a response to the excesses of blue, orange focuses on being all about the individual. I have the right of free speech, the right to make as much money as I want, the right to think whatever I want, the right to believe whatever I want. In America, it's like the most common thing to espouse libertarian values. There's a great deal of orange in the U.S. today, always has been since its founding. Um, the next facet is objectivism. So objectivism, there's a lot to it because it's looking at the world in an analytical manner. It's no longer about what laws, what does the holy book say. It's not about that anymore. Instead, it's I want to measure things. What does this thing actually measure as being? When I look at the sky with a telescope, what's actually out there? Is the Earth actually the center of the solar system? Or could it be something else? Could it be the sun? Let's look up at the heavens and observe things and actually find out instead of just believing it. The scientific method, the heart of objectivism. Um, so the next facet is invention. Invention is just the want to make things, design things, come up with new ways of doing things. Is there a more efficient way of having this particular machine do this? Um, Companies are always inventing, um, they're always designing new gadgets, new thingies, new technology, new apps, new hardware, new software, new cars, new smartphones. There's always more. They always have to come up with more things, and the way that business is designed in the modern day, all companies have to invent in some sense. They'll even change it if it doesn't really need to be changed, just because they need to release a new model in order to remain relevant in the market, which leads into the next facet, which is wealth. So there's a focus on material wealth, how much money people have. Um, you know, a want to worship people because of how rich they are, how big is your mansion, You know, try to be like, the want to try to be like Gatsby. The book The Great Gatsby, which is a very um, a very artful critique of Orange. If you haven't read The Great Gatsby, oldie but goodie, you definitely should. A real interesting take on wealth. But back on the modern day, the focus on wealth is everywhere. Trying to strike it rich. People worrying about, oh gosh, what if I get too old before I've made it in the world? People worshiping Trump just because he happens to have a lot of money without actually focusing on the means by which he actually acquired it. Just the want to worship whoever happens to be the most successful without looking at anything else about them. So the next facet is impermanence. And impermanence, that probably sounds a bit strange, but what I mean by that, it kind of goes back into the invention facet. It's just, it's the belief that you should always change everything, out with the old, in with the new. Everything has to be changing constantly. Uh, you should all like with Google and Microsoft and the tech companies, they're always trying to redesign all their interfaces because they want things to constantly seem new, without, sometimes they'll fix the stuff that's already working perfectly just because they want it to look different so they can say that they've created more stuff. um, Always trying to move on to the next best thing, but in a very short sighted manner. I suppose you could say it's sort of like a conformity to change. In one sense, they're dynamic. In another sense, they're very static. In the sense that when they go about change, it's always about only change and nothing else. We have to change everything because we changed at a certain. It's been like 5 whole minutes since we last changed it. We got to change it again, so that people will think it's new and different. Um, so the next facet is what I call capability. Although in the context of Orange, what capability really means, basically, it's IQ worship, worshiping people with high intelligence. Believing that IQ is the only form of intelligence, which it really is not. But Orange believes it is, and they want to hire the people with the highest IQs. Belittling anyone who might be simple, belittling the people who even do have IQs but just can't quite figure out the world. Um, if someone hasn't made it in the world, then maybe it's because there's something wrong with them. They're not smart enough. That kind of thinking. Worshiping Jordan Peterson because he supposedly has a high IQ. I mean, he probably does, but I don't really care. But I think you get the idea. And of course, you meet people like this who are always like, uh, think that because they have a huge amount of money that they must therefore be smart. I mean, they're probably smart in some way, but they're probably not smart in as complete a sense as they think they are, because money really isn't everything. Um, the next facet is atheism. Now, of course, not everyone in Stage Orange is atheist, but it is very common within Orange. And again, it's mostly because Orange arises as a reaction to Blue, and tends to look down on Stage Blue. Um, Feeling as though they're above it. And they're like, well, if that religion is fake, well, then all religion must be fake. That kind of thinking. And when you piggyback with that with something like science, then it tends to be an extremely materialistic outlook. There's only the material world. There's nothing supernatural. If people believe in the supernatural, then they must be either stupid or subjecting themselves to weird theories. If science isn't only in the material, then it's not science. We can't think too outside the box because then we'd be outside of science. Um, atheism is very common among Orange. And that feeds into the next facet, which is materialism. And again, materialism. I think I talked about this already in the previous facet, but a belief in the physical. Everything is made with physical, chemical processes. People are conscious because they have a brain, which is like an organic machine that works with chemicals and neurons that fire all over the brain, and they believe very strongly that this is all consciousness is, and it doesn't go anywhere beyond that. Um, it's that there's no hocus pocus stuff. There can't possibly be anything supernatural, because if people believe in the supernatural, then they're doing bad science, and of course they never actually try to explore that themselves. Um, the next facet is popularity. Popularity is just the want for appeal, the want to spread your image, spread your brand, become as influential as you possibly can. Get as many subscribers as you can, get as many Twitter followers as you can. You really see this facet with people like Donald Trump. Of course, someone like Trump is mostly red, actually. They have a little bit of orange, but mostly red. But still, with Trump, he's orange enough that he actually does care what people think of him. Uh, he's always trying to fluff himself up, go to rallies and stuff, be the extrovert, spread his image, make sure that everyone, even if they might not like him, that they at least know about him, wants everyone to have him on their mind. There's a very orange sort of attitude to be taking, promotion, advertisement. Hey, look at me. I'm going to make myself look like a peacock so I can appeal to most people. Um, so the next facet is competition, which of course feeds into popularity. And competition is just, um, you know, the business world is made out of an assortment of companies, and those companies. Um, are all supposed to fight against each other, and whoever has the most effective product that sells the most and makes the most money is the company that's going to do the best. And of course, they believe that the companies that are already at the top are there simply because people like them the most, when in fact most enormous companies, particularly on Wall Street, are there just because they rigged the stock market, and it has absolutely nothing to do with people actually liking them. Um, but of course, Orange is shallow enough that it simply can't see past this. Orange doesn't understand that competition might not always be a good thing. Sometimes it can be, but oftentimes, you have monopolies, and we live in a heavily monopolized world. It's actually kind of sad. It's very difficult for small companies to live in the current world just because they get completely overwhelmed by the gigantic institutions that are just sort of like an empire, a stage orange empire, just um, gobbled up everything. That's the downside of competition. Of course, Orange, it has the very strong belief that the way you get the very best thing is always with competition, that they haven't gone as far as systemic thinking. They don't understand, maybe you should actually look at how the world is set up, and with that, try to base what the best thing to make might be. No, instead, it's just, whichever invention happens to outcompete which other ever invention with the way that the market is at this very moment, and they can't see past it. So the next facet is Darwinism, and Darwinism is basically, this strange belief that they have that everyone can automatically make money and become as rich as they want, no matter how poor they currently are. Um, And if people are having hard times, then it's their own fault, and they need to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. Yeah, and if something happened to their company and they lost everything, then it's their own fault. Because they didn't make an effective enough product, they didn't get with the program soon enough. um, Orange doesn't want people getting free health care because they don't like the idea of giving people free stuff. um, Orange tends to believe that if people have severe health conditions that they can't pay for, that those people should just be allowed to die simply because they can't pay. There's a ton of libertarians that actually believe this. It's always been very strange to me, but even in the modern day, like especially among conservative circles, you see a lot of this of if people have health problems and they can't pay for it, then it's on them for not working hard enough. Kind of a soulless take. Um, so the next facet is technology. And technology is just, it feeds back into the invention facet that I mentioned a while ago of invent, invent, invent. More technology is always better. Technology is the way that you make the world more livable. It's always about making more complex gadgets that do more. Um, Constantly inventing, uh, you know, uh, social media everywhere. I mean, of course, it's not just social media, but it's like before that, like earlier in the last century, the inventions of microwave ovens and telephone lines and cars and planes and um, so many things. It's actually hard to drag them all up in my own mind, but there's just tons and tons of inventions. The telephone. Um, yeah, I think you get the idea. Just the belief in technology above everything else. The way that the world improves is only by becoming more technologically advanced and nothing else. Um, so the next field is self help. And self help sort of feeds back into the Darwinism facet of just everyone is responsible for helping themselves. No one else is responsible for helping the person. It's only the person's individual responsibility. We're not a community, we're made up only of individuals. Um, Everyone should be able to just go on YouTube and look up a video about exactly what their problem is and solve it instantly, and smile a lot and tell themselves that everything's okay and then everything will magically be okay. That kind of thinking. The self help industry is ridiculously huge. It's like billions of dollars at this point. I think might actually be more than just billions. Lots and lots of people looking into, just how do I get more money? How do I uh, how do I make myself more of an extrovert? How do I make myself more creative? How do I make myself more hardworking? That kind of stuff. How to do mindfulness. Orange is kind of terrible at mindfulness, although it's probably better at it than blue, generally speaking. Um, so those are the facets for orange. I suppose one final one that I might add, which feeds back into libertarianism. I'm not sure what I'd call this one exactly, but just the idea that I mean you kind of see this with the states in our own country, where the states all want to do their own thing of in my own little world everything is exactly this way, and I don't give a shit about how things are outside of my own little palace. People can do whatever they want outside my world, but within my world or within my state, within my property, it's exactly the way I want it. There's no networking back and forth between different regions. It's all everyone completely for themselves. Um, in one person's world, it's their way. In another person's world, 5 feet across, it's another way. Another 5 feet across, someone else does it completely differently. No sense of community at all. Yeah, I think I just add that on to libertarianism. But anyway, now those are the facets for stage orange. Um, how does orange sustain itself? Well, orange actually cannot live by itself. Orange, even though you'll never get orange people to admit this, they actually survive alongside other stages in the US. They survive mostly along blue and a little bit of green as well. Um, but Orange loves to think that it's there only because of itself, and that all the other stages never needed to exist, which is it is a complete fantasy, and it's really laughable that libertarians manage to think this way, but they do. Um, uh, So it sustains itself basically just by inventing stuff, bolstering the economy, encouraging people to become as wealthy as they possibly can. The American dream is a very orange thing. The rugged individual, working hard so that he can earn the house with a white picket fence and the wife and so forth. Of course, the American dream it's a bit blue leaning. But I think you get the idea. Um, when the founding fathers envisioned the US, it was again as a reaction to full blue in Europe. And although the very early U.S. in the 18th century, it was still mostly blue itself. It was a little bit orange leaning in the sense that they had written into the Constitution that everyone has the right to believe whatever it is that they want to believe. Um, and it because of that, America was able to advertise itself to the world as just the place where anyone could go to make anything of themselves that they wanted. uh, you know People believing that the streets might be paved with gold or something. I think some immigrants in the old world actually believe that. And just because of this idea that America was the place you could go to become whatever it was you wanted to be. You weren't bound by whatever societal role you were given in the country you came from. You could come here. And as long as you worked hard, eventually struck it rich and become your own little king within the United States. That was how people thought, and it's still how people think in the modern day to a large degree. Orange it sustains itself mostly through the economy, and it's led, of course, by a bunch of very rich people, most of whom actually got rich through Wall Street and not through real invention. But of course, uh, the orange zeitgeist of America doesn't really look at that, and the people at the top do their best to hide it, um, hide the fact that corporations have just sort of weeded their way into absolutely everything. America really has a problem. It's become far too individualistic. It needs much more of a sense of community. It This everyone for themselves nonsense is it's completely insane. It really doesn't work. Um, and we're seeing, like with the coronavirus pandemic, it was a very blatant reflection of that, where the president himself basically told people not to do anything, didn't even wear a mask himself, then eventually got the virus himself, and probably would have died from it if they hadn't plugged him full of steroids. And because of his do nothing attitude, and it's Trump I'm talking about, not Biden, to be clear, because Trump didn't do anything, 600,000 people ended up dying. Actually, it's probably more than 600,000, but that's the number that ended up getting counted. And the overwhelming majority of those people could have been avoided if only the country had decided to act as though it's a community and not just a bunch of individuals. You need a community, otherwise, you don't have a country. This libertarianism business, if you take it too far, you could destroy the country. The country could fracture. Um, and it's kind of working that direction already because there's severe political polarization. And it's mostly because of orange policies, the apathy that it has towards anything that's actually moral. Of oh, people can believe whatever they want. I don't have to do anything. This state can do what it wants. That state can do what it wants. And now look where we are. We're on the verge of civil war. Everyone hates each other. There's tremendous financial inequality because those who are wealthy only tried to become more wealthy and didn't want to actually do anything to help out those at the lower rungs. Um, this do-it-yourselfism just isn't working, and that's why very soon, hopefully, we'll be moving on to stages such as green, which is the one that I'll be talking about in the next episode. Um, but anyway, back on orange. So that's how orange sustains itself. Some examples of orange, obviously, the United States. Um, uh, there's I think China, although still overwhelmingly blue, is starting to lean a little bit orange because they're in the place where the young people who focus more on technology are starting to do a lot better, and the older people who only like work with objects and stuff are not doing as well in the economy. And I think it's working with symbols. People who work with symbols are starting to do much better. The governmental policies haven't really caught up to orange yet in China, but I think it will happen just as more and more people just become more technologically advanced and start improving themselves financially. Um, the UK has some orange. Actually, it has a lot of orange these days. Europe in general has a lot of orange, although it tends to vary a lot depending on the country. Right now, I'd say most of the orange in Europe is probably in the United Kingdom, and you can really see that with Brexit, and they're wanting independence from the European Union. Wanting independence from something so you can do your own thing is a very orangish kind of attitude to take. Not to be confused with the green revolutions, because those have a more communal focus, but the orange revolutions are just fuck the government. I want to become wealthy by myself. That's the orange attitude. Um, so those are some examples. Constructive and destructive aspects of orange. Um, the constructive aspects of orange are that it tends to be very inventive, it tends to be creative, tends to be intelligent. It's also dynamic, always looking for change, looking for the best ways of doing things. Invention, of course, is generally a good thing, although, as with everything, it should be done in moderation. But, you always want to try to figure out what the absolute best way is of doing something, designing something, making something. Um, and of course, even though in the US, individuality is something that's been taken much too far, it still is true that, that they are individuals, of course. Um, I mean, they're both an individual and part of a collective at the same time. They're what's called a holon. But yeah, I'll talk about holons in a much later episode. Orange doesn't think in holons. But the reason I bring it up is because there's a sense in which everyone is both an individual and a collective. And what Orange is really good at doing is it's really good at focusing on the individual part of it, developing yourself, figuring out what you really are, what you want to do in the world. I'm actually trying to integrate some of Orange myself right now for exactly this reason. And also just because I need to get my own life started. It's been kind of a problem. Um, so, obviously, Orange does have some validity, but of course, it does have some destructive aspects, which I think I've already hinted at. So it's overly individualistic. That's a very destructive aspect. You can destroy a country if this is taken too far. If everyone thinks too individualistically, which is where the United States is actually headed for right now. Also, the focus on extreme wealth is a very unholistic attitude to take. It creates tremendous financial inequality. um, the extreme wealth gap that we see currently going on in the United States, where the homeless population is just exploding, and it will explode even more as soon as we're far enough beyond the virus that people can start evicting their tenants. Um, the riots that were happening earlier this summer, the Black Lives Matter riots, those were, in part that happened because of blue policies, because they murdered someone for no reason. But at the same time, I think it was also piggybacking off of just a lot of poor people who understood that the world is not something set up so that they can succeed, and who are really outraged at how things could be set up in such an unequal, um, uh, slanted manner, where only the wealthy who are already wealthy can succeed, and those who are having a hard time can't do anything. Just outrage over this. Um, Another destructive aspect is that orange companies tend to produce a whole lot of toxic chemicals that they release into the environment. Orange, it destroys the environment just because of the severe technological stuff that they do. Uh, you know, uh, robbing robbing nature of its resources, invading countries in Africa. Having people work in mines for slave labor, which they still do actually, like for for some of the metals used to make smartphones, some tech companies have people mining in Africa. I think they're technically paid, but it's basically slavery because they're paid virtually nothing, so that they can get metals to make smartphones with. Um, and they uh, because of all the CO2 emissions and emissions of other nasty things into the air. Uh, Stage Orange tends to ruin the environment. They tend to create what's called climate change or global warming, release of greenhouse gases, which is something we're currently seeing, like with the heat wave that Seattle recently had just a few weeks ago, which was completely unprecedented. That is almost certainly the product of decades, or actually centuries at this point, of the release of greenhouse gases um, that were created mostly by orange companies and by inventions from orange companies, cars, planes, appliances, um, you name it. Uh, and at the same time, companies they've managed to they always want whatever's the cheapest, the cheapest material so they don't have to spend as much on it. What's the absolute cheapest thing that they can make something out of without having the customer return it to the company that made it? And because of this, oftentimes, especially with food, they're basically selling people poison, like with the processed stuff, processed bread, processed meat, processed wheat. Wheat is something that's like it's completely different from how it was in the ancient days. Actually, most people can't actually digest wheat very well as it currently is, and there's all manner of health defects that come from things like gluten, just because of how it's been handled by modern day orange companies. Um, and it's not just wheat, but it's a lot of other things, pumping or putting all manner of preservatives and things into the food to make it have a longer shelf life, make it taste better, but at the same time cause severe health defects to the people who eat them. So basically, selling poison to people simply because it's the cheapest, because it will last the longest, and because they can get away with it. Obviously, that's a very unsustainable way of doing things. So, there are a lot of drawbacks to orange, and orange even though it can have a high IQ, it still is very shallow. In the sense that it can't think in the long term, it can't think about the consequences of its own actions. It can't think about the effect that it has on the world. In order for that to really happen, it needs to graduate into stage green. So especially, a lot of people who work in orange companies who get exploited by the higher ups, don't get enough pay, get overworked, too long hours for too little, just generally treated poorly by the employer. Those people eventually want to move up to stage green because they're fed up with how they're being treated. Um, and on the societal level, just as the environment worsens, as economic inequality worsens, people want change. You're seeing this right now in the United States. People are very unhappy. The green era is all obviously very close for the United States, just because we're in a huge turning point. The turmoil that's been happening, all the craziness of the last several years. I think it's because the U.S. is currently going through a phase shift, and it's shifting away from orange very, very slowly and towards stage green. Of course, that's not going to happen quickly, and it won't happen tomorrow. It's probably going to, it's a gradual thing, and it will probably take somewhere around a quarter century um, to move completely from orange to green. But it will definitely happen because really the orange way of doing things is only sustainable for about another 25 years or so. It can't last that much longer, especially considering how unhappy people are now. And even beyond the US, just like how unhappy a lot of the world is right now. Anyway, that's it for orange, and the next episode will be stage green.